Hey, it is Tasha. I'm not going to go into who I am or anything. I'm just here to tell a story about Kevin. So, this happened yesterday morning, and I'm going to tell you this story, but I don't feel good right now. Like, I started my period, and I'm just irritated, and the camera keeps focusing, and it's just weird. Anyway, I just wanted to get on here and tell you about Kevin. So, yesterday morning, I woke up and I wanted to go on a bike ride. So I got my bike and I was like, oh man, the tire's a little low. So I got my foot pump, air pump, and hooked it up and I went pumping it and it wasn't pumping right. And then I felt the tire and it was completely flat. And I was like, oh snap. Okay. So I put that bike to the side and then I got my son's bike. He's 17. It's just a men's bike. So I get it out and I was like, these tires could be aired up because this bike hasn't been being ridden. And so I got the air pump and I hooked it up to that rear tire. And sure enough, I tried to pump it. It didn't pump right. And I felt the tire and it's flat. So I looked at the hose of the pump. It's a foot pump thing. And the hose was just open, like broken. It's old. So I aired out both my tires, and I have another bike that the pedals falling off, and I was just frustrated. I was like, okay, fine, I'm not supposed to ride a bike today. So I go inside and get my dog. His name is Thor, and he's a Chihuahua, and go on this walk. So I'm walking along, and there's a trail in my neighborhood that goes behind my neighborhood, just whatever. And so I'm walking on this, and there was, a woman runs by at one point, and then another man runs by, and then an old man's like on a walk. And way, way, way up ahead, I see somebody kind of walking back and forth, pacing. Looks like a homeless dude, whatever, I don't give a care. So I'm walking and I pass him. I don't even look at him. I just see him out the corner of my eye. Like I said, there's these people everywhere. So then I walked down, and then just very automatically, I was like, oh, turn around. And I just turned around, and I didn't think anything of it. Because, you're just, oh, I'm going to turn around now. You just turn around. So anyway, I'm walking back, and then I see that this gentleman who was homeless was like laying on the ground, almost like on a fetal position, like pretty far up ahead, but I could see that he was laying down. And then I got this thing that he's a king, and I was like, oh. And then I got the message that he's a king and this is his origin story. Let him know. And I was like, okay. Well, if you want me to talk to him, and it's not like I'm having a thought back, but what automatically is returning to that thought is, if you want me to talk to him, then he's going to have to initiate the conversation, because I'm not just going to, hey, whatever. And I was wearing like big on ear, like black headphones. And so I'm walking up closer, and then I take off the headphones and I like hold it in my hand very deliberately. And so I have Thor and I'm walking along, and the guy's like just laying, I walk past him. He's laying asleep, like fetal position on the ground kind of thing. But he's fine. He's like on the grass. He doesn't look dead. So I'm walking and I just smirked to myself, and I probably get like 10 steps away from him, and he goes, hey, 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 hey. And I turn around, I'm like, yes. And he says, do you have a cigarette? I just laugh. I said, I don't have a cigarette, but I do have a message for you. Would you like to hear it? He's like, yeah. So then he stands up, and he's a good this much taller than me, blonde hair, young guy, good looking kid, but just scruffy, just living on the streets or whatever. But he had all of this like gold chains, and he had like a bunch of beads and bracelets, and he had rings on all his most of his fingers, and some of them were like studded and bedazzled. Like, it was just funny. And I was like, and then he had this like white cap. I don't know how to describe it. It was just like flat top and just like that long, and it was just like on his head. And it had like a gold lion and like an emblem or something, maybe Ferrari. I'm not sure, something along those lines. And I was like, oh. And I said, do you want to hear the message? And he's like, yeah. And it hit me, and I said, you're a king. And he's like, what? I was like, you're a king, and this is your origin story. I don't really know why I have to tell you that, but that was the message I had to tell you. He's like, really? And I said, yeah. And I was like, but I told myself that you'd have to speak to me first in order to hear the message, and you did. And so he's like, well, okay. And I was like, well, that's it. And I said, and I look, and one of his chains has like a golden K hanging from it. And so, of course, I like, glittered on the inside. And I was like, what is that K for? And he goes, well, it's my name. I said, well, what's your name? And he said, Kevin. And I just laugh, and he laughs, and he goes, that's some wild shit. Like, I knew I was a king. I know. I've been told that before, but I don't know. I was like, yeah, and this is your story. This is your origin story. This is where it starts, because you're going to be up there telling the kingdom how you started here, but then now you're here. at that time. So anyway, I just kind of felt the energy pull away, and so I was like, all right, well, deuces, Kevin. So then he says, can I walk with you? And I was like, if you respect my boundaries, yes, of course you can walk with me. And he's like, all right. So he like gets himself together and he keeps offering me to drink from his bottle of water. I was like, I'm good. And so we're walking, and I was like, so tell me about you, Kevin. He was like, give me a minute. I was like, okay. I was like, would you like to hear about me? And he's like, yeah, yeah. So I just start telling him like how I was, where I was born, like I lived all over the world, like a military brat, raised by a single mom, like raised in the church, and just these things or whatever. And then he started to feel comfortable and he started to open up a little bit. And he was like, that's some stuff. He was like, I know that I'm meant for greatness. I was like, you absolutely are. And then he's like stumbling and then he like drops his stuff and he goes, can I come home with you? I said, no, you may not. He's like, okay, well, I don't like living out here. And I was like, okay, well, this is your time to change your story. So then we're still walking and I'm quiet and he's quiet. And I see that he's got this like red, one of his bracelets is like this red, stretchy, those stretchy bracelets. And it said, I love. And I just assumed it said you because it said, I love. And I said, oh, an I love you bracelet. What about that? And he goes, I got that from the cops. And he turns it and it said, I love USA. Like, and then it had like lines on it or whatever. And I was like, the police, huh? I was like, you like the police? He's like, they all right. And he was like, but I don't think they need to be out here doing whatever. And I was like, oh, so you get to rule your kingdom and not have to rely. I was like, well, then you get to make all the choices you want and you get to be responsible for the life you live, especially if you don't want people having to govern you and tell you what to do. And he just kind of laughed or whatever and he threw his stuff down. And I was like, well, this is the end of our sidewalk. Like, I'm done. And so he's like, all right, all right. And so kind of said bye. And then I put my headphones back on and I don't live very far away. So then I'm walking and I was like, he will not follow me. And I turn around and he's a good distance back, but he's following me. And so then I go and I'm like, do I turn on my street or do I keep going? And I was like, I'm not going to cower in fear. So then I turn on my street and then I turn around and I don't look back. I'm not like watching behind me. So I turn on my street, I get one house down and I see that he's walking like beyond, he's going to cross the street and then like cross the street to keep going to pass my street. So then I turn around again, maybe one more house down, and he had turned around like he was leaving. And so then I keep walking forward and I was like, he's not going to follow me. He will not follow me because, I came in hot with this message. And then I turned around and at this point I'm like 5 houses down the street. I turn around and he's on my street, probably 2 houses down. I said, nope, no, Kevin, I would prefer if you don't walk down my street. Thank you. And then he turns around, he puts his arms up like to walk away. And then he starts to come back trying to walk down the street. And I said, Kevin. And then he like picked up his pace, turned around and walked to the end of my street and then kept going. I stood there for about 5 minutes. I was never scared, but I was like, yeah, thank you for this darkness, this challenge of power. He's fine. But when we speak to someone, be prepared for what might come up. When you speak life, when you speak truth, when you follow the prompting. And I was never, ever afraid. Ever afraid. So anyway, I walked back to I waited there. He's gone, right? So then I walked back to my house, and my son, my 10-year-old, was like, hey, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah. And so he pours himself a bowl of cereal, and I was like, can I tell you what happened? So I told him that whole story, and he was like, well, now, what if he comes to our house? And I was like, or we could believe that. We could believe that, or we could believe that he, at this point, if he tried to come down the street, A, he wouldn't know what house it is. And B, as far as he's concerned, he just saw maybe an angel or he encountered a prophet. Because I don't think Kevin's consciousness right now is of the rational nature. But whatever his story is, I was prompted to speak it in that right then moment. Isn't that funny? And so if Kevin came vagabonding at my door and banging on the door, whatever, right? But stuff doesn't happen like that in my reality. I don't allow it. I don't entertain it. I don't manifest those reactions. And you can call me delusional, but you know what? Call me delusional. But at the same time, I get messages like that. And so it was really cool synchronicity for me with the common people. We're not in an era anymore where we have one person and a million people follow that one person. We are in the era that there are 1,000 people that all are leading in their pure tone voice. And the masses are following the thousands. And it's going to keep individuating until we are all sovereign. Ooh, focus. It's going to continue until we are all kings. We don't need to be governed. I'm so happy that I met Kevin. And I can't wait to hear his origin story. Behind a screen or on stage, or maybe he'll find me. I don't know. But it's an amazing idea to have in my mind. So anyway, that's the story about Kevin. I'm going to go lay down because my cramps are out of control. So, send chocolate and ice cream. Chocolate ice cream with brownie chunks.